So, in addition to personal action, lifestyle changes, climate activism, and becoming politically active, today I would like to talk about yet another thing that each of us can do to intervene in the climate crisis: communicate. The reading for this week is the chapter by Professor Richard Somerville on communicating climate change science, and that's from the book Bending the Curve: Climate Change Solutions, which is incidentally University of California publication. As the overview to the chapter notes, in it you will, quote, meet Uncle Pete, a fictional character closely based on fact. Uncle Pete does not accept climate change science. Many people know a real person who strongly resembles Uncle Pete. So, the chapter thus seeks to prepare you for encounters with your own Uncle Pete and similar skeptics that you may have already met. Since the article takes up the formidable challenge of communicating the reality of climate science and the crisis to skeptics, in today's talk I'd like to consider a related but in many ways very different challenge: how to communicate action to people who are not skeptics, like your friends. If you're like me, many of your friends are already convinced of the reality of the climate crisis, as we often are surrounded, for a variety of reasons, by people who see such issues similarly. Hence, it may well be the case that what interests your friends most is knowing what can be done about the climate crisis. More to the point, what they can do about it. While such people are very different from Somerville's Uncle Pete, they offer a very real opportunity for communication, though of a very different sort. Moreover, many of the things that Somerville underscores, like preparation, stories, metaphors, language, can also help you communicate with your friends and family. So, exactly how does one open up space for such communication? Even though it sounds paradoxical, I would argue that the best thing is not to initiate talking about the climate crisis, let alone initiate talking about your personal actions. In a book on mindfulness meditation, John Kabat-Zinn nicely suggests the same regarding meditation. This is his quote: every time you get a strong impulse to talk about meditation, how wonderful it is, or how hard it is, or what's doing for you these days, or what it's not doing, or if you want to convince someone else how wonderful it would be for them, just look at it as more thinking and go meditate some more. The impulse will pass and everyone will be better off, especially you. We've all had friends who became enthusiastic about something and then immediately began to talk our ears off about it. This is, unfortunately, not a very successful way to spur people to action. So, when is the best time to communicate new ideas? In general, I wouldn't decide this for others, but leave it to your friends to tell you when they are ready to hear about it. Allow me to give a few examples. Up until relatively recently, I was a pretty hardcore vegan for 5 years. Before that, a vegetarian. Before that, a pescatarian. Before that, I didn't eat a whole lot of meat and animal products for years. Whenever I was out to dinner with friends, this sometimes became obvious before I even ordered, as I would ask the server for information about the food. Consequently, friends frequently asked about my eating habits. When I was a vegan and replied that I was a vegan, that often shut down the conversation. Why? Well, because people know what being a vegan entails. Hence, for most people, there is little need to ask about veganism as a lifestyle. Moreover, as many people are vegans because of strong ethical convictions, they are often seen as feeling particularly virtuous and morally superior. Now, mind you, that this may well not be the case for you, but having been a vegan for years, I can tell you that people often assume that this is how you feel, and moreover, how you feel about them and their moral decisions. In other words, what they imagine that you perceive as their moral failure. Consequently, experience has taught me that announcing that you are a vegan can not only pretty much shut down all conversation on the topic, but can make for an uncomfortable meal for all involved. So how, then, does one go about communicating the importance of diet with respect to the climate crisis? So here's my approach to such communication. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it has generally been working for me for a while. It's certainly better than announcing to the world that I was a vegan. When asked about my dinner choices, I generally reply that, while I have been a pescatarian, vegetarian, and vegan, I now largely think of myself as a climatarian, though I admit to being intrigued by friends who are freegans. So, as you might imagine, people almost always immediately ask, what's a climatarian? What's a freegan? Instead of shutting down conversation, i.e. communication, as the label vegan risks, these words initiate it. So I explained that climatarian is a way of eating like the similarly sounding vegetarian. Relatively new term, as was coined in 2015, it denotes someone who eats with the climate in mind. For example, a climatarian would choose a turkey burger over a beef one, as 2.5 times more greenhouse gases are emitted producing a pound of beef than a pound of turkey. Of course, eating a pound of lentils is far better than either a pound of turkey or beef, as the beef requires, astonishingly, as I have noted in another talk, the release of 30 times more greenhouse gases than lentils. However, and this is an important point to communicate, not all climatarians are purists. The main thing is to try, as much as possible, to be aware of the climate impact of the food that you eat and to act on this knowledge the best that you can. But is this enough? Shouldn't we all be eating a largely plant-based diet and forgoing turkey along with beef? Yes, that's true. But we are not only talking about bringing about greater awareness here, i.e. communication, but starting people on a path. Because becoming a vegan can entail radical lifestyle changes, and the notion of being vegan carries with it a great deal of cultural baggage. And let's be honest, much of that baggage is negative in the eyes of the carnist public. It risks being seen as an alien, sort of far offshore. Climatarianism, by contrast, can be seen as a bridge to that other shore, a welcoming bridge that anyone can step out on at any time. For example, on hearing about climatarianism, people often ask me, if we're at a restaurant, to walk through the menu in our hands to compare the relative climate impact of the food on offer. As a consequence, more than once my dinner companions have chosen more climate-friendly options right then and there. As with the example of beef and turkey, people are often surprised that one tasty menu item can sometimes have half the climate impact of a similar option. Of course, Somerville's advice regarding preparation is worth repeating, as researching the relative climate impacts of different foods in advance is necessary here. However, this is the sort of knowledge that we all need to acquire anyhow if we want to eat with the climate in mind. In any event, a single meal can thus result in someone not only learning about the relative climate impact of different foods, but also result in them acting on that knowledge on the spot. Yes, it would be great if telling people about being a vegan could instantaneously result in them swearing off of all animal products. But in my experience, this is a lot to offer and can completely backfire and have the opposite effects. Climatarianism, however, offers them a way of thinking about food choices, and to many people, thinking about the climate impact of food is indeed something entirely new. If everyone were to think in this way, it could have profound climate impact. Climatarianism is fundamentally different than veganism in this regard, insofar as it does not present people with an either-or choice of either animal products or not. You're not telling people to stop eating that pizza, but maybe to decide to get one covered with veggies rather than 3 different kinds of meat. In terms of overall climate impact, it would be better if most Americans cut their footprint in half by way of choices like turkey over beef, than if just 5% or 10% of the population switched to a largely plant-based diet. And who knows, perhaps climatarianism will result as a bridge to vegetarianism and to veganism for many people, as it offers them the first tentative steps in that direction, even though it may take years, as it did for me, as I went from being a pescatarian to vegetarian to vegan. As with climatarianism, just the mention of the word freegan opens up the door to our communication and perhaps action. Since many people have never even heard the word freegan, it is a wonderful opportunity to explain that while eating a largely plant-based diet can have profound climate consequences, wasting less food can have an even greater impact. It has been my experience that most people are truly startled by this fact. Incidentally, as Wikipedia nicely and concisely notes, quote, freeganism is often presented as synonymous with dumpster diving for discarded food, although freegans are distinguished by their association with anti-consumerist and anti-capitalist ideology. It's true that some people are pretty hardcore freegans. For example, Peter Kalmus, who is a climate scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, collects food to eat that has been put out by his local supermarket because it has passed its expiration dates. On the other hand, as with being climatarian, being freegan is pretty flexible. For example, If we're at a restaurant, we can take home everything that we order and actually eat it at some point. When at home, we can prepare sensibly sized portions and eat everything on our plate. Similarly, we can work at being freegan when we cook as much of what we have purchased as we can, such as by eating leafy beet tops as well as the root. True, we have not been dumpster diving for a meal, but we have eaten food that otherwise would have likely wound up in a landfill. In other words, as with climatarianism, freeganism is not an either-or lifestyle choice like veganism. Instead, anyone can make freegan decisions throughout the day. Communicating through your actions can be a very effective form of climate activism. It at once underscores that you really care about this issue rather than just giving it lip service, and then anyone can do the same, even if doing so just involves in ordering a turkey burger. After all, to get anywhere, you need to take a first step. Such communication can happen in all sorts of ways. People are always asking me about my electric bike as they are truly curious about what it is. It is even the case that, noticing that I have a somewhat limited wardrobe, noticing that I wear the same clothes a lot, people sometimes find polite ways about asking if I am a minimalist, which is, in fact, something that I work at being. In fact, I get asked about all sorts of things, being an urban farmer, living in a small, though not tiny house, swearing off flying, having only one child, climate activism, my meditation practice, and so forth. I do not advertise any of these lifestyle choices, but rather wait until people want or are themselves ready to hear about them. When they are finally ready, people often come to me with scores of questions as they really want to learn about something like urban farming or meditation. This communication strategy also leverages personal climate action. Not only do these actions have direct impact on the crisis, but they encourage others to act as well, as they underscore how seriously you take this crisis and that you are willing to, quote, walk the talk, as people say. Such personal action also underscores an often ignored truism. Before you can change the world, you need to change yourself. Otherwise, to be honest, you may well cause more trouble than good. To again echo that injunction often attributed to Gandhi, be the change that you want to see in the world. In any event, I'm curious both to hear what you think about Somerville's advice on how to talk to Uncle Pete about the climate crisis, as well as ways of communicating with concerned friends and family who want to do something about the crisis, but are not quite sure just how to go about it.